Planning dementia-friendly communities our responsibility towards future generations. My name is Thom Simnett. I'm a student representative on the Young Planners Cymru steering group and a master's student at Cardiff University studying spatial planning and development, and I'll be chairing this webinar today. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Can we all ensure your camera feeds and microphone feeds are muted so that we can all listen to the speakers clearly? We'll be having a Q&A session after the speakers have spoken, so if you have a question, pop it into the chat and I'll be sure to ask them once we've heard from everybody. I'm excited to introduce you today to three individuals who I've worked closely with for my master's dissertation, investigating the extent to which Plymouth has implemented dementia-friendly policies to address the challenges of helping an ageing population live independently. This is something that really interests me, how town planners can affect change and help improve the lives of people living with dementia. Having experienced what it's like to support family members with living with dementia, I all too well know the difficulties that people living with dementia experience when exploring their local environment, and how isolating this disease can be for people with the disease and for those close family members. It's predicted that 1 million people in the UK will have dementia by 2025, and this will increase to 2 million by 2050, with related costs of the disease also expected to double within the next 25 years. Unless there's a huge injection of capital into the provision of residential care facilities, the majority of people with dementia will have little choice but to cope in their own homes for as long as possible. In fact, most people with dementia would prefer to live at home regardless of the difficulties caused by the dementia. Researchers has found that moving people with dementia into unfamiliar environment can have debilitating effects on their levels of confusion and disorientation. Therefore, at a time when their lives are changing dramatically and irreversibly in every other way, it's generally beneficial for people with dementia to have the stability of remaining in familiar surroundings of their own homes and local environments, until residential care is absolutely necessary. That's where planners come in. We already have some of the tools needed to make our communities more dementia-friendly and accessible to people living with dementia. As seen through the growing number of local planning authorities that are now creating specific policies for dementia, with a number also creating SVGs specifically for matters of health and dementia. Through my research, it's become clear that planners can't take this task on their own, but with the help of strong local advocates for change and their aspiration to become more dementia-friendly, we can accomplish this together. I think what has become clear through all the adversity of 2020 is that we more than ever have responsibility to future generations, whether that's through combating climate change or ensuring we leave the economy stronger for future generations. We have a responsibility to future generations to mitigate the impact that the built environment has on those living with dementia, to ensure it doesn't have a detriment to them, which could force them into residential care at an earlier point. It's clear that dementia-friendly communities are consistent with the aims of the Social Services and Wellbeing Act and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and the provisions within those acts. That's enough from me. I'd like to introduce you to the first of our three speakers today, Sarah Lewis, who has been the Planning Practice Officer at the RTPI for a number of years. She has responsibility for managing the RTPI's Practice Advice series and writes on a wide range of planning topics, and is the author of many RTPI practice advice notes and online training modules through RTPI Learn. This includes the Dementia and Town Planning advice. Sarah has a long-standing interest in health and equality in town planning. Over to you, Sarah.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah Lewis. I'm the Planning Practice Officer at the RTPI, as Thomas said, and I'm the author of our advice on dementia and town planning. We first published this advice in 2017, and since then it's been well received and it's had quite a wide audience. Because this is an area that's been fairly new to town planners, I updated the advice in September of this year to take account of any changes in legislation, policy and best practice. And hold on a moment, I'm just having a bit of trouble getting my screen to go forward. There we are. Our advice is endorsed by both the Alzheimer's Society and Public Health England, and both organisations provided information and advice with the writing of this advice and fact-checked it for me to make sure that what the advice that I was giving to town planners works with their own advice that they give. And the aim of this advice is mainly to improve awareness of dementia amongst town planners, and to highlight the important role that town planners have in creating environments that work for people who are living with dementia. The advice outlines government policy across all 5 nations, is key information, best practice and case studies. I'm not going to go through the whole advice today. I don't have time for that with the presentation that I have. But if you need more detail on any of the things that I mention, I recommend that you read the advice for more detail. So I'll begin with looking at what is dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term, and it refers to when a number of different diseases like Alzheimer's, dementia and other conditions damage the brain. There are a wide range of symptoms, and these include things like memory loss and difficulties in thinking or problem solving, which a lot of people are aware of, but also less well-known things like sight and hearing loss and problems with perception. It does often make other health conditions worse, and it's most common within older people, although there is early onset dementia for some. One thing to remember is that the disease is progressive and it's always going to get worse. As Tom already mentioned, the figures for dementia in the UK are high. There are 850,000 people with dementia living in the UK, with a prevalence rate of around 7% amongst older people. And the Alzheimer's Society predicts that this number will increase to 1 million by 2024 and 1.6 million by 2040. And much of this increase in the rate of dementia is due to the UK's ageing population. And coastal areas in the southeast of England are found to have the highest rates of dementia. Christchurch in Dorset has the highest figures. And with these high numbers become high financial costs. Care costs are put at around £34 billion a year in the UK, and this is expected to rise rapidly up to £94 billion by 2040. And these costs include things like healthcare costs, so costs to the NHS, social care costs, the cost of home care and residential care, and unpaid costs. This is the time and support provided by family members and friends to people living with dementia. One thing to think about is that the emergency admissions to hospital in 2019 in England, 32% of these emergency admissions were by people over the age of 65 who have dementia. And these are significant numbers in a time when we all know that we're living in very with a lot of resource constraints and a lot of other demands upon NHS and care systems. And as Tom mentioned in his introduction, there are preventative measures that can help people live well for longer with dementia, means that they can have a positive impact upon financial costs, but also on the personal cost to the individual who has the condition. So how does this translate into the individuals when they live in the community? Medical practitioners say that it's vital for people with dementia to stay active. This is physically, mentally and socially. And common local activities that people do are the same for all of us. It's shopping, it's socialising, it's eating out, leisure activities like going to the park or the library or the cinema. However, the Alzheimer's Society conducted a survey that found that 35% of people with dementia only go out once a week and 10% only go out once a month. And the importance of connection and being part of a local community for people living with dementia, I think is very well summed up in this quote. It's somebody who has dementia that was a participant in a Natural England commissioned report on Is It Nice Outside? And they say, I go out in Brockwell Park for a little walk, stroll, and I see. What do I see? I see families having their picnic on the grass, weather permitting, people walking their dogs. Some are going to the Lido for a swim or exercise. A whole variety of things, but you are surrounded by people. I know how important it is from direct experience that people, We're humans, we need other humans, and we need them like hell. We need them, you know. And this is something that I think that we can all appreciate with the year that we've had so far. So how should we plan our towns and cities and villages to account for these principles of needing for people to be connected within their community? The layout of the community and local environment is extremely important, not just for people living with dementia, but also for other older people. It can be seen to be either enabling or disabling. Having access to amenities like local shops, the doctors, the post office and banks within an easy, safe walking distance is important. And this can help people living with dementia live independent and fulfilling lives for longer. There has been a great deal of talk this year around the importance of green space and getting outside and exercise for everybody. And that's particularly important for people with dementia. It's been shown to have positive impact on people with dementia's health. So there are a number of principles for dementia-friendly places that have been put together. And this isn't my own work, this is something from Oxford Brookes University. And the principles of good design are related to being familiar, legible, distinctive, accessible, comfortable, and safe. So familiar, it means that the functions of places are obvious. Any changes are small scale and incremental. Legible, there's a hierarchy of street types, so that you know that when you go from a residential street into a busier street, into like the main centre of a town, you get a sense of familiarity in the way things are laid out. And also that there are clear signs at decision points. Distinctive, there's a variety of landmarks and architectural features so that you know where you are. It's not identikit houses for miles and miles. Accessible, land uses are mixed, and this allows for shops and amenities to be 5 or 10 minutes walk from people's homes. The entrances to places are obvious, and places also comply to disabled access regulations. It's comfortable. There's open space and that is well defined, and there's toilets, there's seating and there's shelter and there's good lighting, all the things that make a difference to everybody's lives. And also that places are safe. Footpaths are wide, they're flat and they're non-slip. So the RTPI has been working for the last few years to encourage the principles of dementia-friendly design into town planning. And these can be applied a variety of ways. But one thing to remember is if you're including these principles, to do them early on. It means that they will be more effective, they will be more embedded in the work, and also more cost effective. Now, from a number of case studies that I found from around the country, I'm going to offer some principles of the way to embed these principles into town planning. It seems only right to begin with Plymouth, and where they have taken an integrated approach to dementia-friendly town planning. The Plymouth City Council has won a number of awards from the RTPI for the quality of its town planning work. And the Plymouth plan includes an ambition to become a dementia-friendly city. It says that people have a choice and control over the decisions about their life, to feel valued part of the community and live well with dementia. The planning department works closely with the Dementia-Friendly City Co-Ordinator, Claire, who is speaking later, and she'll be able to tell you much more about the approach taken in Plymouth. In South Ribble, they've included dementia at the start of the local planning process. They appointed consultants from the University of Stirling to consult people with dementia at the start of the review of the local plan. And they wanted to be able to identify what a dementia-friendly local plan would look like. The results were used in the issues and options consultation. And these initial discussions will be revisited as they go through the planning process. In Watford, they have taken an approach of having strong local plan policies. In Watford currently, there is very little housing specifically designed for people living with dementia. So they've included strong, specific local plan policies as a way of addressing the shortfall. The local plan sets out principles that should be designed into new residential developments to support people with dementia. What is particularly important is that these policies can then be assessed at a later date to see how they're working. You can also work in a long-term and integrated way, and this is something that Worcestershire County Council have done. They seconded a town planner to the Public Health Department, and this meant that they had strong ties and a better understanding about how each department and how they work and what their priorities are. They published a SPD on health and in 2018, and part of this was around dementia and creating age-friendly environments. And what this means is that it's an integrated approach. It's not dementia to one side on its own. It's integrated within a whole health approach. And this is something that they're continuing. In Sutton, it's at a slightly more specific scale. Can somebody go on mute? Because I can hear somebody talking in the background. In Sutton, they are promoting dementia-friendly urban design. They have published a design guide right at the start of this year. And what it does, it's trying to improve the public realm of the town centre using 12 guiding principles. And 2 of these principles are to make Sutton an age-friendly town centre and make it a dementia-friendly town centre. I was very pleased when I saw that the RTPI advice on dementia was used as part of setting the scene for this work. And what it is, again, it's an integrated approach. So it's the whole of the public realm for the town centre that they are improving, and dementia is one aspect of that. What they did is they began with a street audit, and they found that the town centre had poor disabled access, hard landscaping, excessive clutter, and sparse public seating. And they identified a number of sites where they could make interventions. Also, the Urban Design Guide has been used to inform the COVID-19 social distancing measures for the town. So it's also already having a significant impact. You can also make requests of developers at the pre-application stage. So what I'm trying to show is that it's all levels. So it's at the plan making process, at the draft local plan, at SPD level, but also at individual site level. And that's something that's been done in Timebridge. They had a planning application for 240 homes, which is the first application for a much wider site, which was for 2,500 homes. And what the senior planning officer did is they made some quite specific urban design requests, in that the site is dementia friendly. And the developer response was extremely positive and very keen to work in this way. And the outcomes of this are things like having clear boundaries for the site, a variety of materials, and key buildings are able to help with wayfinding for people. And then she also asked for a dementia-friendly garden. This is a sensory garden for people with dementia that means that they can be involved in the local area. And it's sited next to the play area to promote interaction between the 2 groups of residents. This is at an early stage, so we have to wait to see how it works out, but the indications are that it's all good. And it shows how the enthusiasm of an individual planner can make a difference. This is last case study, and this is of Hull. What they did is they looked at the location and setting of extra care housing and saw how important it is for the area. In Hull, the number of people living with dementia is set to increase by 40% to 2025, but they only have 40 extra care units within the city. So the Joint Housing Needs Survey identified a need for more. So what they did is they assessed sites very carefully. Flooding is a particular risk in Hull, So this is something that was important for them to look at. They had a dedicated senior planning officer who was on the project team, and also the whole City Council planning manager was on the project board throughout, from the inception to completion of the project. And the result is that 316 affordable extra care housing units have been built. Now, this is spread across 3 sites in the city. And this is quite important because it means that residents have the option of a relatively local place that they can move to. And this minimises disruption to relationships and lifestyles. And we've already said how important it is that people feel part of the community. The image on the screen is of Redwood Glades. It's a dementia-friendly extra care housing. And one feature which I particularly like is that there are public access to some of the facilities on site. The garden, cafe and hair salon can be used by members of the local community, and this improves neighbourhood interaction. It's also well located for local shops, services and for public transport. Anecdotal evidence, which we haven't been able to back up yet with firm data, is that there are direct health benefits, and the staff have reported that there are a decrease in emergency admissions to hospital. So what's the message to take home? I think the most important thing to say is that town planning has a role to play in creating dementia-friendly environments. It is another partner in helping to make places dementia. I really need somebody to put their camera on mute. Thank you. Thank you.
Sarah, I think it's the phone caller who's joining by phone. If you could mute your phone, please. Thank you.
And there is a long way to go, and it is quite early days, but there are signs of good practice coming through, and that the intention is that these are shared with everybody. So I'd just like to say thank you for your time. This is something that the RTPI has been working on for a little while and will continue to work on in the future. I do recommend the practice advice if you need more details. And I'm also putting together the final touches of a RTPI Learn module. So there's a couple of different options for the way that you like to work and learn more. I'm happy to take questions at the end of the session, but if you'd like to get in touch, otherwise I'm happy with that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was wonderful and very insightful. Can I just ask that the person who's joined by phone, can you please put your phone on mute? It's just that we're getting quite a lot of feedback. I would like to now introduce you to Ian Sherriff, who has had a very varied career, first starting off as an aircraft engineer in the Fleet Air Arm before a dramatic change and embarked on a university course to become a social worker. He's now the academic partnership lead for dementia at the University of Plymouth, as well as the chair of Plymouth Dementia Action Alliance, which won a national award of Dementia-Friendly City at the year 2016 and 2017. Over to you, Ian.
Thanks ever so much, and thank you for inviting me so early. Cool. So it's lovely to hear, and I expect to see all of you later. I think what I want to do, what I want to cover in my talk is the background to dementia-friendly communities, how we got to where we are today, a quick talk about the Prime Minister's groups that I chair and also the Prime Minister's work at the moment. But I think more importantly, instead of taking a reflective look on figures and numbers, I want to bring you right up to date in how in the last year, with some of the work that Claire and I have done and also others around the country, the effects of COVID and dementia-friendly communities. And I think finally, I'd like to look to the future. So that's where I want to go. I'm now, I can see myself, okay? So what I'd like to do now is bring my slides up. So I'm hopefully, can I get those, please? Where are they? There. Can you see those at your end? Is that okay?
Yes, that's good. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, right. This is me about 4 weeks ago in the garden of Number 10 with the Prime Minister. And we were talking there about where dementia-friendly communities go after Christmas in the new sort of world, we hope. And so we were setting the scene with him and Angela Rippon. And I want you to take note of the comment I've made below, because I think the last year has proved that, yes, dementia-friendly communities are a lifeline to an awful lot of people. But what has played a massive part in that this year is technology. And what it means is that, like today, you know, we have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week world now, due to we can access facilities like we're on today, Zoom, Teams, etc. And that's made a difference to some of the things that we're doing within dementia-friendly communities. So I want to start off with this, and there's 58 people on the line, so that's a small group. So never doubt, and I mean this, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful committee people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing it ever has. And if you were with me in 2008 and 9, when we first started thinking about dementia-friendly communities, it was only about 3 of us in a room on a very damp Thursday afternoon in October. And we had this sort of idea, and that idea, we had no idea where it was going to go. We didn't realize where it would be like it is today, because it's not only in the United Kingdom, but it is global. So I'm working in China, Japan, America, on the continent, and latterly with Claire, we're working, well, going to start work in Tanzania. So it is. So the background, so for us, it was 2008-9, and in 2011, we started the Plymouth Dementia Action Alliance. And the key word there is action. I get fed up going to meetings where people just talk. And so what we said from the start, it would be action. And this came about because of some research that I was doing at the time in Plymouth University Medical School, looking at the what people living with dementia were. It was an early diagnosis program, but what they were telling us is we have no voice and nobody knows or cares about us. Can you imagine that? Living in a state, in a rural community or in an urban community with some of the problems of dementia, and nobody knowing about what it was like and nobody caring about you. And so we took that cudgel up, and that's what really started the whole dementia-friendly movement. Then in 2012, a said gentleman called Mr. Cameron launched the Dementia Challenge, and I was very much part of that. We were myself, Angela Rippon, Jeremy Hughes, and a few others. And so we launched the Dementia Challenge, and that was in 3 areas: so research, health and social care, and dementia-friendly communities. And our target in 2012 was to have 15 dementia-friendly communities by 2015. We had over 50 at the time, and to date there are, I would say, 360 to 400 different sizes, different types of dementia-friendly communities, all working away busily in their communities. And for me, as an individual who was there at the start, it's quite heartwarming and humbling to think that that crazy idea we had that day has emulated into this. You've then got the PM's National Dementia Friendly Challenge on that group nationally, and we've just reconfigured it as a result of talking to the Prime Minister the other day, and that will have on it in the new agenda, it's going to be talking about how we can make dentists, pharmacies, energy companies, and it goes on, travel, etc., etc. So what on that group, we have people who can make a difference, who will challenge their sector and ensure that their sector picks up the cudgel. You can see what's happened in a lot of the areas of the work that we've done previously. So there is a BSI standard that was set on the code of practice for dementia-friendly communities in England. It's well worth looking at, because it that was about 2 years ago that we wrote that, but it's worth looking at and getting up to date. And another document I think you need to look at is Dementia-Friendly Rural Communities Guide, which myself and some others have written, and to bring you right up to date, we've just published, and it's gone out to 10,000 town and parish councils, is the Dementia-Friendly Rural Communities Guide for Town and Parish Councils. Simple reading, but action focused. Okay, my next slide. I just wanted to tell you about these things because it's not only within the community, but I chair the Prime Minister's Air Transport Group, and we've only been going just over 3 years, and all the UK airports now have to meet standards for hidden disabilities. So they're actually looked at or reported on back to the Civil Aviation Authority. And so that was a major step forward. So if you're an individual with dementia, autism, hearing, sight loss, etc., then the airport now recognizes that and puts in place help, guidance that will take you through from the moment you step out of that taxi outside the airport until you get on the aircraft. We're now working on the aircraft industry itself, so the aircraft side. But what is really heartening is that we've been asked now by countries around the globe to say, can we have a look at the standards you've set, and we will emulate them in our countries. And this is happening through the British Standard Institute, but also the Global Standard Institute. So we're working away busily there. The Rural Dementia Group that I've spoken about, which I chair, the Prime Minister's one, we have 40 different rural group representatives on that. And that ranges from the WI, farming communities, local farmers, town and parish councils, district councils, all pushing forward to make their organizations, but more importantly, where they work, dementia friendly. And just an example, the WI has 250,000 members. They have committed themselves to become dementia friendly. You can see there the Rural Dementia Guide 218 and the Parish and Town Councils Guide, which you can get hold of. If you can't get hold of it, just email me and I'll make sure I can put you in contact. Dementia-Friendly Communities, as you can see, that was the challenge. That's what Mr. Cameron set us. Running alongside that was Dementia Friends Programme, which we launched way back then. But you can see it ranges from a massive city below Plymouth to the rural community above it. And if anybody's watched the film War Horse, that was where some of it was filmed down here in Devon. And they offer different challenges to make them dementia friendly. And Claire, in her role as the Dementia Friendly Coordinator for Plymouth, has done a fantastic job with that work down there. We have over 120 companies on the alliance, all striving to make the city dementia friendly. You never get there. You're always aiming to be better than you were the day before. And that came into the fore during the COVID crisis and also in our rural communities. Okay, so that's a rural community. So what are they doing in rural communities dementia friendly? So what I've done there, I've got 5 parish councils. That's not churches, that's the lowest form of local government, to work together. Now, if anybody watches the Vicar of Dibley, they're not like that. They've grown up now, they're very responsible. They have the Localism Act that they can act, where they can provide services to their community. And to get 5 town parish councils to work together was quite interesting, but they did it. They employ a dementia-friendly worker and a support worker to that person. They are looking after, visiting, providing support to 56 families in that parish area. And that is amazing, because before that, in a rural community, not only is it isolating and lonely, but you're very lucky, I would suggest, to get services because of the issues around time, travel, etc. But so that group during COVID were visiting, telephone calls, they were doing assessments, and the local GPs were prescribing them, social prescribing. So, and we sent out a survey to 10,000 parish and town councils, and what they wanted was a simple, practical guide, and we sent that out in October to every one of them. If you live in a rural community, just ask your parish council or town council, you'll get access to that document, but also what they're doing. What do we know? Well, research indicates where local councils, rural and urban, get together, start thinking about dementia support, it actually starts to dissipate the isolation, loneliness and stigma and despair experienced by people living with dementia. I could go on at length about numbers of people, but I think that's already been done. But the key one there, I think, is there's 1 in 3 people over at 65 will develop it, but a third of people with dementia live in their own community and live on their own in their own community. Can you imagine waking up this morning in a community where nobody understands you and you're living on your own? So those are some of the massive challenges we have. And I know the last speaker talked about the number of younger people getting dementia. That is started to really climb. And the reason we're very concerned about that, because if you're 30 or coming up to your 40s, you won't have a pension that will pay out then. You're likely to have a mortgage and sometimes have dependents, i.e. children, still relying on you. So you can see some of the financial and social issues that that presents. This is the voices of people with dementia doing 2020, because I don't want to dwell back in before then, because I think we need to look forward. So they were talking, so one of the things was an individual with dementia said, I couldn't get in contact with anybody because my iPad and my mobile phone was stolen just prior to COVID. Some of the big issues were not seeing my wife and children because the person was in residential care. So we needed to think about that. I'm scared, depressed and worried. Every person that we talked to about dementia during COVID came up with that. Difficulty as not, I can't go to the doctors and not knowing when I can see my doctor. And yes, we have all these systems in place, but sometimes people just need to see that person. And one of the things which has come very apparent during this, and I'll go through the figures now, is that in a survey to over 2,000 people, we found 82% said they had deterioration in their symptoms. So not only were the symptoms bad prior to COVID, but they started to really increase. And 82% reported increase in memory loss, difficulty concentrating. And you can see the figures there. There were people, individuals saying that reading and writing have become more difficult, and that speaking and understanding speech, more than a quarter have seen a loss in ability to do daily tasks such as cooking and dressing. And if you wrap that up into the issues that we're going to face 2021 and belong, and now that the symptoms due to the lockdown, the issues around loneliness and isolation, there is a massive issue building. I won't go through all of these, but you can see some of the issues there. It just builds on that previous slide. Not only does the have a negative effect on the individual, carers who, that's his family carers, were saying that their physical and mental health have been dramatically affected. And when we looked at that on my global group, talking to America, the Americans have done a survey and they reckon some of the issues coming forward from family carers who are caring for an individual are similar to post-traumatic stress. So big issues around carers. And when you consider carers pre-COVID are caring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with some respite, but now during COVID, there was no respite. So it was down to you. And you start magnifying that with where they live, the type of communities they live in, you can see some of the big issues coming forward. Okay, and this is another interesting fact, between March and June, over a quarter of the deaths in England and Wales had dementia, making it the most pre-existing condition for COVID environment deaths. So dementia has taken a double hit there. And I put down the bottom there in yellow. We need to have the care home debate and put that at the forefront as well, because care homes are going forward in a dementia-friendly way, but COVID has had a dramatic effect on that, and I think we need to take some lessons learned from our care home programs and also care homes themselves to see where we can do things better. How do I see dementia-friendly working in the future? Well, a comment there, and this is quite an interesting one, and it's something about society. I see my family more often than I did before because I can see them on video. And what that was about was families would less often visit their parent, the elderly parent or the elderly relative who had dementia. But because the use of video and the individual was helped to video or use different media, they could see them more often. They joined in more activities than they online activities. And that was very relevant when Claire talks about what we've done in the city of Plymouth, but more so around the country in our rural communities. We've done remote diagnosing. So the research where I'm involved in and also with the diagnosing of dementia on a program that I'm on, we're using remote platforms for that. Now that has issues, but it works. And we got to think about how we will use that in the future. So we're also doing social care assessments online. The big issues around that are going to be around safeguarding. When you're in somebody's home and you're doing a social care assessment, you've got time to look around, take in the environment. When you're doing it online, you can see the issues there. So there'll be an increase, I think, in the use of telephone, Zoom links, shopping online, where you know as well as I do, that has taken a massive rise in the numbers. And the Plymouth Dementia Action Alliance, with its 120 companies, organisations, and when we coordinated that research, Claire, the team and myself, it was amazing the sort of feedback we got from individuals with dementia and their families and also the organisations. So you can see there will be a new way of working. So when we talk about planning for the future, we need to factor in some of the major lessons we've learned through COVID. I like this because Alex Fox said, and this is about what we're going to do in the future. When we started the Dementia-Friendly program off way back in 2010, when we were sat in that room, we were trying to be more creative in our thinking, getting other organisations involved in dementia-friendly, because if you looked at it then, and even now, the size of the problem is massive, and we needed to get everybody involved to make it go forward. So Alex says we have more creativity than we know. People and organisations are finding a million ways to offer their help, knowledge or skill to others, often free. You know, this isn't big brother stuff. It isn't big organisations. We individually in our communities, in whatever size of organisation we have, we're a part of, we can be more creative to take on the challenges of the future, because next year and the next 2 to 3 years is going to be extremely difficult as far as funding, etc., etc. So we need to think differently. So when you go away from here today, get your pen and pencil out and start thinking blue sky or whatever they call it nowadays, of how you can provide services or be more creative in how you work with people living with dementia and their organisations. And I want to leave you with this thought, because this is what we thought way back in 2010. We can't change your dementia, but we can change the community you live in. I ran with this thing about X amount of years ago, and I carried that flame high for families and people living with dementia, because every time you're having a bad day, you just think about those individuals with dementia and their families. So when you leave here, you take this flame with you and you keep that flame burning so that you will make a difference in the communities you work and live in. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you, Ian. As ever, you're full of information and great anecdotes. It really sets the stage for why we need to plan our communities for people with dementia and the challenges planners face when trying to implement change. I'd like to now introduce you to our last speaker for today, Claire Puckey, who is the Dementia-Friendly City Co-Ordinator for Plymouth City Council, working in a strategic commissioning team, and she also coordinates the Plymouth Dementia Action Alliance, a role she's held for more than 6 years. Like Ian, her background has been very mixed, working right across the age ranges in both voluntary and statutory sectors in a variety of settings. Over to you now, Claire.
Thank you, Tom. So today I'm just going to tell you a bit about my role and how our Dementia Action Alliance operates in Plymouth. I'll mention just a little bit about why the built environment is important to people living with dementia, and give you a few examples of dementia-friendly changes to the built environment in Plymouth and some of the work that I've done with our council planning team. So I'll just wait for Tom to get to the first slide. Okay, I can't actually see any slides, Tom.
Yes, I've got them.
Okay, that one will do. Okay, so I won't say too much. Can you just go back to that previous one, please? That's it. Too much about this, because obviously Ian mentioned this earlier, but just how it all started in Plymouth, and it resulted from the research that Ian did with research team in the university. And basically a lot of the people that were living with dementia and their carers at that time in the city, in response to the questions that the research team asked them, they were saying lots of things, much as you'd expect really. Their experience wasn't good day to day. So a lot of them were saying they were feeling isolated, ignored, and embarrassed because of the stigma at the time of having dementia, and unable to access services and things like that. So Ian and the rest of the team looked at that and thought there has to be something that we can do that will actually make things better for people in this situation. So they had that ambition, as he mentioned, to try and make Plymouth a dementia-friendly city, and created a vehicle, which is the Plymouth Dementia Action Alliance, to make that happen. So our alliance was the first one in the country, and it was formed back in 2011. Now, we ask anyone wanting to be a member to complete a very simple action plan, and we ask them to include a minimum of 3 actions they will take to become more dementia friendly as an organisation. And we've got a very diverse membership base, like Ian said, of well over 100 organisations from across a really wide variety of sectors. So that includes various departments within the council, health organisations like our main hospital, GP surgeries, dental practices, schools, the university, organisations in the care sector, so care homes, care agencies. We've got a number of law firms that are part of it, financial institutions like banks, building societies, transport operators, voluntary sector organisations, retailers, emergency services, churches, leisure facilities, all that sort of thing. So broadly speaking, my role as the coordinator is about raising awareness of dementia and supporting that wide variety of organisations that I mentioned to work towards becoming more dementia friendly in their approach. So that can sometimes involve me, if they need me to, helping them to complete their action plan to become a member. And sometimes new organisations, if this is the first time they've really considered dementia, they can be a little bit stuck. So if that's the case, I will usually suggest that they perhaps focus on 3 distinct areas. So the first one being people, and that just involves awareness raising and training. So I always offer to go in and do dementia awareness sessions for the staff, paid and volunteers. I encourage them to make it part of new staff induction as well. The second area is place. So if they have public premises, I offer to do a dementia-friendly assessment of the building. I make them aware of any issues that might potentially cause difficulties to people living with dementia, and there are lots of things in the built environment that can. And I make suggestions for just little changes that they can perhaps consider to make that environment easier for people with dementia to negotiate. The third area of focus is around policy and processes. So that might involve me, for example, encouraging them to consider reviewing their HR policies around, for example, what they've got or can put in place for team members to support them who become carers, to have flexibility when they need to have time off to be with a person they care for, and also what they can put in place for team members who get diagnosed with dementia to keep them at work for as long and as safely as possible. So things like considering negotiating with the person changes to their duties, perhaps more frequent supervision, reducing their hours, that sort of thing. Now, when an organisation submits their action plan to me, I will check it and then I'll upload it onto the National Dementia Action Alliance website, and that member will then be visible under our Plymouth Alliance members list. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so once I see organisations starting to work on implementing their actions, I can then arrange for them to have formal recognition, if they want it, in the form of certificates, window stickers, things like that, that they can display around their premises, and it will have the logo here that you can see on the slide, the Working to Become Dementia Friendly. Now, other things that I do is I work on upskilling staff and increasing awareness of dementia-friendly working practices across various departments in the council, and that includes our strategic planning and infrastructure team, which I'll say a little bit more about later on. I do a lot of public awareness raising in lots of different ways, but partnership working, and I know Sarah's mentioned this earlier, alongside people living with dementia and carers is absolutely crucial. You have to have that in place in order to know that you're getting it right. I also do a lot of work through the year with various different student groups, and we hold, as an alliance and the university, we hold an international dementia conference in Plymouth each year. Now, due to COVID, we haven't done that this year, but we are currently planning a virtual one, which will run over 3 half days, one half day a week in March next year, and that will be free to attend. So that might be something that some of you would be interested in knowing a bit more about. So if I can have the next slide, please. Okay, so just a bit about why the built environment is important to people living with dementia. I mean, the environment can make a huge difference to the quality of anybody's life, can't it? So if you can just think for a moment of an environment that is special to you, you know, what is it about that environment that makes it suitable for you? Is it because there's a window that you can see nature through? Are there particular colours on the walls and the floor? Is there certain furniture? Now, some environments can be potentially frightening and bewildering for people with dementia, and they can sometimes feel like almost like they're in a foreign country where they don't understand the language. You know, it could be very unfamiliar, there could be too much noise, excessively bright light, too much clutter, and just all too busy. And all of that can sometimes lead to stress that can exacerbate that person's symptoms. But if environments are dementia friendly, research has shown that this can do a lot of positive things. You know, now I'm not going to read all of these things off, but I'll just pick one or two. You know, it can definitely reduce disorientation and support people to find their way around. Crucially, it can enable people to stay independent and in their homes for longer and reduce confusion and agitation and things like that. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, there's also clear evidence to show that if you get the environment right for people living with dementia, this has got benefits for many other people too. You know, the elderly, people with disabilities, because the building or the space becomes easier to understand and navigate for everybody. And also, if you're talking about older people that have dementia, and obviously we know that it isn't just a condition that affects older people, but normal aging impacts on the senses. So older people are likely to have poorer hearing, poorer eyesight, and that can be made worse by visual and spatial perceptual distortions that can be part of some people's dementia. So if an environment is poorly designed, this can be further disabling and confusing. And it is important to note as well that everybody experiences dementia differently, but it's likely that a lot of people living with it will experience increased distress, disorientation and agitation linked to their surroundings. So the built environment really does matter. So now I'm just going to share with you a few practical examples from Plymouth. So one of the first ones is about our dementia-friendly car parks. So the vision for this, when we introduced it back in 2016, that was to support those living with dementia to live as well as possible for as long as possible, to support and involve carers of those living with dementia, and also to improve accessibility to the city centre. So that would make it easier for carers and the people that they cared for living with dementia to continue doing activities that they enjoy. So the process of this, how this all happened was, I did a series of dementia awareness sessions for the civil enforcement staff on our parking team in the council, and Ian and I did dementia-friendly assessments of 2 of the city centre multi-storey car parks, which just happens to be Western Approach and Theatre Royal. I then met with a local group of carers and I shared with them some suggested signage changes that the parking team had thought they might do as a result of the assessment that we'd done. I asked for their opinion on whether they'd be helpful or not, and we discussed other possible ideas that might work well for them. And what this group of carers said was, you know, this is great, we think these signage changes are really good, but actually they're probably more useful for people that are early diagnosed. And when it gets to our stage of the game, this particular group, by the way, were all quite elderly ladies whose husbands had dementia and it had progressed quite far in most cases. We think when it gets to our stage, you need to shift your emphasis on supporting us as carers to support people with dementia. So I had a conversation with them and I said, look, I know you've said to me before that you don't come into city centre very much anymore. You struggle. I understand the reasons why. It's very, very difficult. Can you think of anything that we can do as a council or consider as a council to make things easier for you, to sort of support you to come back into city centre again and do things you enjoy, even if it's just going to that cafe to have a cup of coffee like you used to do? So a few suggestions sort of went around, and when I was sitting there listening to them, I thought, yeah, there's a grain, there's a nugget there that I could probably do something with. Couldn't do it exactly as had been suggested to me because it wasn't legal, which makes it sound a lot worse than it was, but it was to do with blue badge spaces. So anyway, I then discussed my conversation with our senior community protection officer, who's the manager of the parking team, and we came up with the idea of introducing some pilot dementia-friendly parking spaces in those 2 car parks that we'd done the assessments on. Now, I initially contacted Stirling University in Scotland because they're a world leader in dementia-friendly design about our plans, and they had told me that no one else had considered or had done anything like this to date, which I sort of found quite surprising at the time. So I used my knowledge about dementia-friendly design considerations to advise the parking team on how these spaces should look and where they should be located. Could I have the next slide, please? Okay, so what actually happened as a result of all of this was designated parking spaces initially went into those 2 city centre car parks as a pilot, and we received really positive feedback from a lot of carers who said that they appreciated our intention to help. They found them really useful. Then subsequent to that, further spaces were put into other council car parks across the city, and they're now in 7 of our car parks, including, I say new coach station, we've had it for the last 3 years, but it was put in there as well. And the ripple effect of all of this is that other organisations and other areas have emulated this work now. So Derriford Hospital, for example, have put spaces in. One of our GP practices has done it. And further afield, which I've had quite a lot of contact with other teams in other areas, Middlesbrough, Bracknell, Worthing and Prince Charles Hospital in Merthyr Tydfil have done something similar. And I'm still getting inquiries about these spaces 4 years on. Right, if you could just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a photo of one of the initial pilot spaces, and as you can see, it's clearly labelled. What you can't see in the photo, but is really important, is that the space is located at entry level in the car park, so i.e. they're alongside the other spaces for people with support needs, the blue badge spaces, spaces for parents and children, that sort of thing, and they're close to the ticket machines and the pedestrian exits and walkways, which is really important. Okay, so if I can have the next slide, please. So this was one of the other things that we've done in recent years. The glamour of my job sometimes knows no bounds. You're probably thinking dementia-friendly toilets, what's that? But a few years ago, I worked with our council's facilities management team to do dementia-friendly assessments on some of our public toilets in the city, and I made recommendations for signage changes. Now, this is the door to some of our newer toilets in city centre. And I can remember talking to the person that I went round with from the facilities team, and I said, I just want you to imagine that I'm perhaps someone who's had dementia for a long time. And I, perhaps in my own head, my sense of reality is now changed, and it's not, you know, at the time, 2017 for me. I've gone back in time in my head, perhaps a decade I've lived in before, which could have been the 1960s, something like that. So certain features and certain aspects of design are not going to be familiar to me. I'm going to be looking for different things. So on the front of the door there, I don't know if you can see it clearly, but the only signage that they initially had in the porthole was a very, very subtle frosted silhouette sort of sign. So there was a few. And I said, that may not mean anything to me, because some people with dementia will lose their ability to recognise abstract symbols on their own. Some will lose the ability to recognise like text. So you need to cover all the bases and have a combination of simple picture and text where possible. And the yellow and black combination works really well. It's easy to spot. So I said, right, on the door, you need to have ladies and gents, picture of the toilet. You need by the door handle, a sign saying pull to open. And also, I don't know if you can notice it, it's a bit small, possibly, a sign saying that you need to put a 20p piece in to go in. So if you can go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so this just shows inside one of the loos. I said the next problem that I'm probably going to have, which you can't actually see in this picture, is there's not a clear way of working out how to flush the toilet. So there's just at the moment like a small round disc that is actually set into the wall, and it's unfortunately the same colour of the wall, so it doesn't show up. So I said you need a label there to make that clearer. And I said then the next issue that I might potentially have is how on earth do I wash and dry my hands, because there's an all-in-one machine, all singing, all dancing, that dispenses soap, dispenses water, dispenses the hot air, and it's sensor activated. That's probably not going to be familiar to me if, you know, my sense of reality is I'm still in the 1960s. What I'm probably going to be looking for is a regular sink with traditional crosshead taps and a bar of soap, which I'm obviously not going to see anymore. So you need to have clear labels telling me how to use the soap, how to use the hand dryer. So that stuff is very, very important. I've also done similar things with signage changes and assessments with all our public libraries in city centre, and our first stop shop office, which is our office that the public can come into for appointments about various different things like housing, etc., etc. Could you move on to the next one, please? Okay, so this project, I'll just tell you a bit about this. So in recent years, Ian and I have worked with groups of Year 2 dental students at the Peninsula Dental School here in Plymouth, obviously on dementia-related projects. The last project that we did last year was really quite exciting, and it was a partnership between us, obviously the students, an organisation called Well Connected, which are a community interest company that work on community engagement, and the Bailey Partnership, which is a local firm of architects. Now, with support, the students produced a virtual dementia-friendly dental clinical environment based on a real-life clinical setting in Plymouth. And they also developed a dementia-friendly dental toolkit, which covered people, policy in place, as I mentioned earlier, in a simple user-friendly checklist type format that practices can use themselves. Now, the place component of this included making changes to the physical environment of that clinical setting. So things like changes to signage, flooring surfaces, the waiting area, etc. So on this slide, on the left, what you can see is the actual floor plan of that real-life clinical setting that the students used. And if you can notice, there's different coloured flooring throughout. Some of it's dark, and that can cause potential issues because dark floor surfaces can sometimes be perceived as looking like holes by some people with dementia. And if there's lots of changes in floor surface throughout buildings or different types of pavements, etc., that can be perceived as looking like a changed level of the floor. That can sometimes look like an obstacle that you have to walk around or a step. And on the right of the slide, you can see the floor plan that the students designed. So amongst other things, you can see there's continuous flooring throughout, it's lighter, the floor surface, and it's a bit more dementia friendly. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so on the left here, that's the actual reception area in the clinical setting they used. Very dark, quite uninviting, isn't it? There's the physical barrier of the desk by the window. There's a very dark carpet again. So on the right is the more dementia-friendly reception area that the students designed. Much better lighting level, it's more welcoming, and it allows for a clear view of the waiting area. So the next slide, please. Okay, so on the left here, that's the waiting room, the real life waiting room, very low lighting levels, dark carpet, etc. And the two pictures on the right show the two waiting areas that students designed. Now, I suggested to them they do two to give the option of a quiet space if one area became too noisy and busy. And there's good furniture in there, all with backrests and armrests, lighter flooring, etc., etc. So that's just a few of the practical examples. So the last thing that I'm going to just tell you a little bit about is some of the work that I've done with our council planning team. And our strategic director in that team is supportive of the dementia-friendly approach. I was asked quite a while ago now to deliver a bespoke training session to our planning officers. I've been consulted by our planning team for advice and guidance on some local building developments. And I'm also now involved in the weekly planning applications list that gets circulated out. So that means that I can raise any dementia-friendly issues that I can see might potentially be a feature directly with the responsible case officer, which is really, really helpful. Sarah mentioned the Plymouth plan, so I won't say too much about that. But subsequent to the Plymouth plan, this year, the Plymouth and South West Devon supplementary planning document was adapted across Plymouth, West Devon and South Hams. That was in July. And that document basically gives guidance for developers and residents who are seeking planning permission. So our planning team worked hard on that for a long time, and I supported with the dementia sort of related content. And what's brilliant about this now is it explicitly states that to ensure accessibility, amongst other things, good practice guidance needs to be considered when designing a new development proposal. And it mentions obviously the RTPI guidance that Sarah talked about earlier. And it also includes now a specific section in the bit where it talks about parking for motorists with disabilities, that the provision for dementia-friendly car parking should be considered. And it lays clearly how that should look. So there should be larger spaces with bold and clearly defined boundaries. It needs to be located as close to walkways, lifts and ticket machines as possible. Like I said earlier, should be brightly lit so that it doesn't cast shadows, because that can cause misperceptions in people. And there's also very sort of detailed guidance on how the dementia-friendly signage should look within that. And the point that any attendants that work in car parks should also be trained in how to effectively support people who have dementia and their carers. And that's a significant step forward, really, for us in Plymouth in making that particular type of environment more dementia friendly. So just to finish, if you could just go on to the last slide, please. Okay, so just to sort of take up really just things that you can perhaps think about as a result of this webinar, so it doesn't just become a dusty and distant memory in your minds. If you could maybe consider spreading the word and encouraging other people that you know within planning and organisations that you work with to become more dementia friendly. Crucially, involve people with dementia and their carers in any planning that you do. Integrate your planning with a range of other partners as well, and access further training. There's a lot of training available now. I have sent Thom a resource list that I've put together. It's got lots of sort of articles in it and lots of other bits of information, but it's got the details about the specific dementia-friendly design courses that Stirling University and Worcester University do. So you might find that helpful. Perhaps Tom will be able to circulate that out to you after the webinar today. So that's me. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you, Claire. That's very insightful and really interesting how Plymouth has kind of approached trying to implement dementia-friendly policies. If I could ask all the speakers to that floor. I'd like to thank you all today for taking part in this webinar. All been great and provided really interesting information. I'd now like to open the floor up to a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and I'll do my best to get everybody's questions asked. We have a question from right at the beginning from Pravna. Surrounded by people and staying connected with the community are the main highlight features that can bring positive impact in people's lives, especially with special needs. But how would this very fact be possible to realise post-COVID-19 environment and the world? I think this was asked during your section, Sarah. I don't know whether you want to answer it.
Obviously, during COVID-19, things are extremely difficult, and we've heard cases of people not being able to visit their family members, especially if they're in a residential home, and the difficulties this has brought, and as Ian mentioned, the decline in people's individual health. There have been examples of where care homes have put in place things to make it so that you can still visit each other. So, for example, having screens where you have a room that people from visitors go into, and then the person living in the home comes from another side, and they have the screens where they can see each other through that. But that does limit the amount of interaction that you have, and it can still be quite distressing. I would say that it's early days with these things, and there's going to need to be work to look at this in the future. And I think maybe Ian has more closer interaction about this, and maybe knows a little bit more than me.
Thanks, Sarah. I'll take up that. Clearly, around the country, each area has been working like mad to make sure that contact between the individual living in a residential sector can still maintain contact with their loved ones. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that when we started this journey with COVID, it was the spread of transmission that needed to be halted. And if you're living in a closed environment like a care home, if something did start there, then it spreads like wildfire. So we had to look at, not us, not me, but the care home providers and national guidance had to take that into consideration. I think now we're getting further down the line of COVID and understanding it, and we have a vaccine program in place. We will see innovation and flair coming into play. But it has been difficult. This is less than a year ago that we suddenly were hit with this storm. And when I look at the innovation that has gone on, and I spoke about this, the last thing I said to you was about innovation. And, it isn't a closed market. It isn't just the people in the residential sector who are looking for ideas and thoughts on this. It's everybody, be it a planner, be it somebody in social or health care. So I think, we can't let the brake off, but there are places now where people are visiting. They're tested prior to going to visit, and hopefully, just hopefully, you've got some of this under control. But the effect of that has been tremendous. There is one theatre company called Vamos, who have actually put on a show. It's called, I think it's Wave at the Window or something like that. It's quite interesting. So it's gone into the arts and the culture of the organisations about care homes. I don't think there's an instant answer to it. I think, you know, Sarah has already said that. We're dealing with this situation hourly and daily, and thank goodness that we've started to get a vaccine in less than a year. So I think, you know, we will get there.
Thank you, Ian. Question for you, Claire, from Kate. You discussed the principles of good design. Do you think there are ways to change existing places to make them more dementia-friendly, as well as creating new built development which are dementia-friendly places? Are there key examples of this in residential development?
Yeah, I mean, people are changing existing places all the time to make them more dementia friendly, and in a number of ways. So sometimes following assessments, say that I've done in Plymouth, that will be through putting up dementia friendly signage. It will be from perhaps reconsidering the layout to make it just more easier to navigate. It might be changing like certain types of flooring or lighting or whatever it is. There's lots of different ways of doing that. In residential development, yes, I mean, there's different sort of schemes around the country and around the world actually, where new builds are being done. A lot of the work up until sort of fairly recent years has been retrospective, though, if that makes sense. But yes, there's a mixture of both, you know, doing the retrospective work, but also the opportunity now to build things from scratch.
Great.
Thomas,
yeah.
If I can just add to that, if we look at our colleagues around the world, there are some fantastic examples of designing residential care, but also the sort of regimes, I want a better word, inside those. So look no further than the Flemish example, what is going over there. And Olivia Constanza, who is leading that over there, would welcome a call or a Zoom, whatever we can use. So if I drop that to you, Thomas, you can actually send that on to individuals on the group. But I think the other thing is you need to look at how do we change the environment. And if you look at airports, because we've done a massive amount of work in those over the last 2 years, where we provided safe passages through, quiet rooms, etc., etc. So, you know, we've done it in very lively environments as well. So it's worth looking at, say, Heathrow or Gatwick and their approach to hidden disability dementia-friendly airports.
Great. A question from Debbie. How do we convince our planning colleagues who think planning is all about the economy? And when Boris is saying build, 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 is there a relationship with reducing costs for the developer?
I'm guessing that's for me. I hope there aren't many planners that think the planning system is all about the economy. I'd like to have a little bit of a chat with them if they think it is. They've not been listening to the RTPI very well, if that's their opinion. I would say about the point I made about putting things in early and at the start. Yes, there is a situation where there's a lot that can be done retrospectively, as Claire has gone through with her examples. But if it is a case of it's a new development, and if you put these things in at the start, they are much more cost effective because you're not then making changes. And also it makes places that are much more pleasant for people, for everybody to use. So you know yourself, if you take the airport example, they are confusing places, they are noisy, they are difficult to navigate around, especially when you're late for your flight. So there are benefits to this more generally, and if you have a more quality environment, then it's going to be easier to sell.
Definitely. A question from Pravnav again. What measures, in your view, in terms of policies, guidelines, standards, or legislation that can be introduced and implemented for supporting the caregivers for people with special needs, including caregivers to the people living with dementia?
If you want, I'll start that one off, Thomas. every carer is entitled to an assessment of their need, and that should be definitely pursued. I mean, it is, I know, in when a social worker goes out to visit, or a social care worker, they should take that into consideration. If every carer in the United Kingdom down tools today said it's over to you, health and social care, the social care system will collapse. So they are a key element in the provision of services to individual, and yet they are lonely, isolated, and the world that they live in is 24 hours a day, as I said, 7 days a week. So anything that any of you out there can do is to suggest to your local MP, etc., what are you doing about carers? They should get what they deserve through the community care process. Sometimes they don't.
Claire, have you got any thoughts on that as well?
Not really. I mean, you know, Ian's kind of said it really for that.
Okay. A similar question from Tim. Are care homes the most appropriate environment for offering care for people with dementia? Is the right approach not providing housing with care, extra care / assisted living, or designing residential environments which allow for greater level of independent living and encourages interaction within well-designed environments with flexible levels of care?
I can start with that. I think what you need is a variety. You need a variety of different types of accommodation for people, whether this is mainstream housing, whether this is support with people coming into your homes to help you, or for extra care housing, because this is a disease that affects everybody differently and it changes over time. So you need that variety and the choice for people at the different stage of the condition, but also the way their experiences and what support they have around them. So yes, you do need the residential care, but there is the design in the local communities and a lot that can be done there to help people stay in their homes for as long as possible, because that's what people, researchers have found, that's what people are looking for.
Definitely.
I would totally agree with that as well, Thomas, Sarah. Claire and I, in our work, both mine in the university, but also in research, and Claire is the coordinator, we know that families, or at least a family carer, would love to keep their loved one at home until the bitter end. Mm-hmm. But due to the support that was available and the environment that they were living in, it became increasingly difficult. And the carer, or the carers that we know, were on their knees at the end, and it just had to go, the individual just had to go into a residential setting. But we all know that there are, where do I feel happier? I feel happier at home. And we've got people, 1 in 4 beds in the NHS is taken up by people with dementia who don't need to be there. They're not there because of something the NHS can do. You know, there's not an ongoing health problem. It's their dementia, and you know, we can't do anything about that dementia. So you can see that, you know, the backlog, freeing of beds, is sometimes hampered by people staying in hospital longer than they should do, because there's nothing out there in the community for them.
Yeah, definitely. We've got one last question for Claire. I think this is for. It's about signage. It's from Kimberly. I'm interested about the impact of information overload. Can too many signs telling you what to do, where to stand, where not to go, etc., be too overwhelming and cause anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, if you had too many signs, and I always say that when I'm doing assessments with organisations, I say to them, look, you just need to look at putting signs up, clear signs that are signing key, really important stuff, not sort of just every little bits and pieces, you know, entrances and exits, where the toilet is, that sort of thing. Because yeah, if you had too many, it would be confusing, not just for people with dementia, but I would argue for anybody, if you've got arrows pointing this way and then arrows pointing that way. So just the really critical key parts of information need to be signed.
Yeah, definitely.
There was an interesting point raised there, because it happened in airports. They had all these signs about where the toilets were, and then I think, Claire, you might have been with us that day. We walked around Exeter Airport, and
Yeah,
we got in the toilet and we said, "Where's the sign to get out?"
yeah, that often they don't have signs, do they, in loos telling people how to come back out again, and a lot of people get lost. Must admit that's happened to me, and I don't have dementia. I've gone or if there's like 2 doors leading off. So yeah, that's really important.
So that brings to the end of today's webinar. I'd like to thank all the speakers again. You've been very insightful, and you know, it's a really good webinar that we've produced today. If anybody would like any of the PowerPoints, or as Claire was talking about, the resource lists, give us an email and we can get those sent out to you. Thank you for everything today.
Thanks very much, Thom.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye now. And well chaired. Well done.
Thank you.